Good evening, everybody. How are you? How are you tonight? It's wonderful to see you here. My name is Kamilah Rashied. I am the Assistant Director of Community Programs and Engagement here at the Art Institute in our dedicated programming wing, which is Museum Education. And tonight you're joining us for a conversation series that we started recently in October of last year called The Gathering. The Gathering is a new conversation series that invites cultural thinkers, makers, and leaders to engage in forum-style discussions about the impact of art on public life. The exhibition, every time we do the conversation, acts as an inspiration for the topic of our talk and what I will discuss with our panelists. The works we show this evening will really act as a catalyst for a discussion not only about Van Gogh's sensibility and approach to painting, but also the ideas at the heart of the exhibition from the perspectives of our panelists. I'm going to talk just a little bit about the exhibition for those of you who haven't seen it. I hope you do see it. We've chosen this exhibition because it's the first to truly delve into the artist's personal journey in relation to his works. So much has already been said and written about Van Gogh, but the most controversial and perhaps problematic part of his place in art history has been the inclusion of intimate details of his personal life that inform how we approach his art. There's little dispute about his genius, but there are tons of polarizing opinions about how his personal life, his journey as a human being, can or has been used as a tool to understand his work. Each of our panelists tonight, in their own distinct ways, use aspects of their most intimate relations, spaces, and experiences as source material for their work. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists. Julia Fish uses her home as a foundation for capturing the experience of looking, living, and working. In addition, she has completed time and site-specific projects and installations. Julia's work has been presented in 23 solo exhibitions since 1980, and her paintings and works on paper are included in the permanent collections of numerous institutions, including the Art Institute of Chicago. Within your program, she has a current work in our new contemporary gallery, so that we've notated it so that you can find it there. She's also a professor of studio arts at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Aymar Christian, PhD, researches new media and creative economy. As part of this research, he documents the changing market for television across numerous popular and academic publications. Dr. Christian's interest in digital production has led him to produce several independent video projects. The most significant of these is Open TV Beta, a platform for art and television that shares the narratives of queer, trans, and cis women and people of color. Aymar is also an assistant professor in the School of Communication at Northwestern University. Our third panelist tonight is Alberto Aguilar. Alberto's work often incorporates found materials as well as exchanges with his family, artists, and other people he encounters. His work bridges media from painting and sculpture to video installation, performance, and sound. He's been featured in numerous solo and group exhibitions, and he is the coordinator of the Pedestrian Project, a resident and visiting artist program at Harold Washington College, where he is also a professor in studio art. So tonight, we're going to break the conversation up into different chapters. We're going to start with what I call meditations in formation. The exhibition very much kind of takes you through a sequential timeline of Van Gogh's life and career. So we're going to break up the conversation into little vignettes that kind of touch on each section. In his formative years, Van Gogh has a fascination with birds' nests. The paintings, The Bird's Nest, were perhaps the beginning of a meditation on the concept of home and belonging for the artist, and he continued to meditate on that really throughout his career. The act of revisiting is pervasive in Van Gogh's works, and even beyond his studies, his copies of other works to hone his craft, he keeps returning to similar themes. I wanted to ask Julia, who also often repeats or revisits work, why you think that might have been so important to Van Gogh, this idea of revisiting works or revisiting ideas.
And do you mean specific to the nests?
To the nests, yeah, maybe as a meditation on home. He collected them avidly.
Right.
When he first started, he's an untrained artist. When he first started to train, he used paintings of those nests as part of a study in color.
Right.
So why do you think that was sort of formative, informed him as an artist?
I was stunned to realize through the information in the exhibition that he had a collection of 30 or around 30 nests in his room, and so that in itself is a kind of meditation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the idea of collection and the differences that would be apparent because there are different makers of those
Right.
nests. So the impulse to collect and to understand difference by observation, I would want to speculate that that's a model for a condition that's specific to the life that's being held.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that looking at one's own painting, having a reason to revisit that, allows one thinks after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
You make a painting or a drawing, and it's there, and it allows you to rethink just by its being.
Just by being able to look
Yes,
at it after
exactly.
it's done.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's something that you do in your work quite a bit. Like
I do. Yeah.
You revisit a theme, an aspect, and your home is often the source of that.
The home has been subject for 25 years or so.
Why is it so important, or how has your home continued to be a source of inspiration for work? How does that work for you, to kind of use that as source material?
Well, I would say, given the image that I know all of you are able to see, because we have a small monitor to help us know what's behind me. So, just as an example, that's the entry of the house taken apart. So it's perhaps less, in this instance, less revisiting as taking a full form and examining it part by part.
Mm-hmm.
What is also I can say about this work is there was one, and I had no intention that there would be four, and
Okay.
eventually a fifth section. So the work itself taught me to see and allowed me to think about that entry having a north, south, east, and west, if you will, and that the going over it, in and exiting the house is another kind of directionality. So that's almost a nest in the way that they're
I never even thought about it that way.
I didn't until this moment. Just going in and seeing the nests again this afternoon. There's a circularity there to that center point. Yeah.
Well, let me open this same question up to the two of you. Are there things that
About
you
revisiting.
find yourself repeating or revisiting? Is it kind of how Julia described it, where she made one and then you consider and then you add? Or was it a things where you revisit things and it's very intentional? How does that work for you in your practice?
You want to take it first?
I'll take it.
Yeah.
I did want to talk about the nest. Can I go back to
Yeah,
the nest?
go back.
Okay, the nests, I think what Van Gogh saw in those nests was the same thing that he saw in the workers
Yeah.
that he admired so much, and it was sort of this like artistry, making art in a sort of effortless way, something that was so integrated into
Yeah,
their
a part of nature.
into their
but
lives
beautiful.
or
Yeah.
into nature in the case of the birds. But yeah, I use repetition a lot as a way, sort of like what Julia said.
Right.
In the space that I had here, I'm a resident artist here, I used, this is a very sort of like calculated and maybe cold architecture.
Uh-huh.
So is the space that I had over here, but the light entered that space. So I used the act of repetition. I used this paper that I hung on the walls, that I folded in half. I used it as a way to intimately get to know the space.
Mm-hmm.
So I think repetition is that. It's a form of intimacy,
It's a relationship.
Yeah.
You're there every day. You're dealing with it
Right.
every day.
Right.
Yeah.
but it's also rehearsing one's steps.
So can you get into that a little bit further, rehearsing one's steps? That is a perfect segue for you, Aymar.
Yeah, and you could.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. Go ahead, Aymar,
Rehearsing is interesting because, I make video works, I produce and distribute video works, and there's a lot of revisiting and repetition in that process. So when you're filming something, you'll often take multiple takes of something, and you're revisiting it in the moment to try and perfect it in some way. But for me, if I identify as an artist, and I really identify more as an academic than an artist, but if I have an art practice, it's social practice art, and I work in community, so everyone I make videos with, I see regularly. I see often in different contexts, and we're often talking about their work again and again and again, sometimes when it's in production, sometimes after it's already been released and they're trying to make something else. And so that has been really great for me because it actually allows me to think more deeply about the work by revisiting it with the people who made it, or the people I'm trying to make work with. And at the same time, it's been an ethical process as well, right? It's about being responsible to the world around you.
Wow, I love that you said an ethical process.
Yeah.
So what I took away from this was like, it's a relationship. So this idea of revisiting of meditation is also seeing, so seeing something that maybe needs to be there and needs to be added, or is even just like a further consideration. Not that that first thing needs to be fixed, but this is a further consideration of that initial impulse. And then this idea of relationship, this harmony, or even just sort of an understanding of what that mechanism is, what that relationship is between you and the thing, because you're doing it over and over again to refine what you do. And then there's this idea of responsibility. I'm going to keep doing this thing, to hone this thing, because I feel a responsibility to make a quality product. So I love all these different meditations on like what that means to repeat for you.
Yeah.
So in Alberto's image of the chairs, I don't know if, can we get that?
Yeah, we'll go for it. Okay, wait, we lost it.
Where are you? There.
It's coming. And
The chair.
There we go.
So is this an image that those elements were repositioned more than once?
I'm sure they were. I don't remember because this is 2012.
Okay.
But I do reposition them, and I also try them out so that I find the right. This is called chair pairing, so that I find the right combination.
Right.
But I mean, when I was looking at it the other day for giving it to you guys, I realized that for myself, I should have put that fishbowl the other way around. So, and then the other thing is, when I shoot a photo like this, I take probably 50 pictures, and I change my angle.
Right.
So that's a form of repetition as well.
Right.
And even now, I don't use fancy camera anymore. I just use my phone to take any pictures that I take. I take 30 pictures of anything that I shoot, and I always tell that to my students. Like even if it's on your phone, take 30 pictures because there's no way you're going to get the picture on the first shot.
Yeah.
okay, I like it. We're going to move on to the next chapter. The next chapter is going to take us into external influences, external relationships. So after a series of unfortunate and maybe not so great career choices, Van Gogh decides to pursue his career in earnest as a painter. He is wooed, but also wants to go to Paris to live with his brother to pursue his career in earnest. And this is the first time that he is exposed to neo and post-impressionists. He's read about them, but he's never seen their works in person. He's now coming from the countryside to a global city like Paris. And Japan is opened for the first time, or reopened again for the second time, to trade with the West. So that is also a very informing moment for him. He's exposed to Japanese woodblock painting, and that continues to sort of resonate and be a part of his work from then on. So I wanted to pitch this to Aymar and kind of ask you about what you think that might have been like. How how do those external, those exterior influences, things happening in the world and society at that time, what other artists are doing, how do you think that informed his creative process from then on? And then it's also important to remember too, and something I think that you'll relate to, is that the academy at this time, larger cultural institutions are largely closed, are very selective. And a lot of post-impressionist artists are starting to create their own shows, their own displays of work, their own exhibitions outside of the academy, which is a real pivotal sort of cultural shift in how work is shown. How do you think that might have informed Van Gogh as an artist at that time in his career?
Yeah. Well, I think what's really great about the exhibition is that when you move from the Bird's Nest Room, his earlier works in the countryside, to the Parisian sort of moment, the colors sort of start to come out really profoundly. And I really love that shift of being in a place where you're maybe secluded from society, and connecting with the soil and workers, and then coming to this global city where there's just influences everywhere. I mean, in this painting, in the gallery, it's next to the Japanese prince, and you can see the color theory kind of influencing him. But then it's also, of course, a painting of novels, so he's exposed to an intellectual culture, to new ideas, and wanting to be as great as the influences outside of them. And I think that's a very natural impulse for artists, to look at the world around them, to see other works that inspire them and want to achieve similarly great things. It really motivates you to create, to have other people around you that are doing great work. I think that is relatively universal amongst artists. Not every artist is the same, of course. So being a country boy going to the city and being inspired is, I think, a very classic tale. It's one that I sort of identify with. I didn't grow up in the rural parts of New Jersey. I grew up in the suburbs of New York. But going to the city was, everything for me. And seeing Rent on Broadway for the first time, exposed me to queer politics and new artistic forms. And coming here to Chicago has been extraordinarily inspirational for my art, both in terms of trying to create a distribution platform outside of the Academy of Hollywood, which is the studios and the networks, and then also seeing the artists around me who are creating work here and wanting to support their craft as well and help them achieve greatness.
Yeah, that was kind of like where I was going to pivot that, is just how is Chicago a character for you? In your artist statement, you talk a lot about finding a community here.
Yeah.
And how that was sort of an impetus for new work. Can you just take us a little bit through the trajectory of coming here from Philadelphia, and then what Chicago meant to you and how it might have propelled you into Open TV Beta as a platform?
Oh, totally, yeah. So I got my PhD in Philadelphia, so I had 5 years in Philly, and really didn't go out that much. I got a lot of writing done.
Well, you were getting your PhD, so.
I was working, I had stuff to do. But I really didn't see enough of the city. And so when I came here and I finally had a tenure track job, I felt like I had some stability. I felt like I had a opportunity to really be a part of the city that I was in. I was also, frankly, alone. My partner and I were long distance, Chicago and LA, so I needed friends. I needed people so I wouldn't get depressed. So for me, I had a lot of external influences. One was queer nightlife and queer art scenes, where I was seeing a lot of performance artists do really brave work and really making their personal narratives public, right, in this very spectacular way. I think Chicago is a great city for emerging artists. If you're young and you're trying to get your career started, there's tons of places to show. There's tons of other working artists who are willing to collaborate with you. And I saw that energy, and I thought to myself, here I was in grad school binging Netflix and writing and watching lots of television, and I didn't see that energy in television, right? I didn't see this kind of collaborative, expressive, experimental energy in television, and I wanted to take what I was seeing in Chicago and position it as television, right? To say that television can be a space for emerging artists, it can also be a space for queer artists and artists who have been excluded from this distribution platform for decades and decades. And that might actually change what we think of as television, right? And I love that we're talking about this in the context of Van Gogh, because I think we think of Van Gogh as a formal experimenter, right? That he really created new ways of seeing the world.
Right.
And I think you can only do that when you come from an outsider's perspective. And I think being excluded from institutions forces you to do that, right? That you have
forces you to be creative.
It forces you to be creative, because you have to get seen, right? You have to, and you're not going through the formal channels where work is getting seen. So you have to sort
And
of do it
possibly whatever
differently.
you're doing is just sort of not the mainstream.
Right.
It might not be in vogue. So so also you might naturally, inherently be more creative because you're not necessarily
sometimes
worried
think
about
that.
the status quo.
Yeah, and I think that's exciting. I think we should all be excited by that.
Yeah, I agree. So let me bring that out to the larger group. Is Chicago a character in your work? You know, what outside of you is really informing how you make?
Definitely. I mean, I just gave a talk about, my friend invited me to be part of a panel on, it was called Chicago Style. That the idea was that we sort of are teaching and Chicago's a teaching city for artists, but the idea was that our teaching and our art practice are sort of meshed, and that's sort of a Chicago style of being. So anyway, he asked me to give a 7-minute talk, and I actually went back in time. I talked about the town that I grew up in, Cicero, Illinois, the first town west of Chicago, and sort of I was talking about the historic mobster activity that took place there, and how that has sort of impacted my own practice, which I won't go into.
I mean, that would be interesting, though, if you did.
But sort of this DIY attitude that you see in Chicago, or that spindle sculpture that used to be in Berwyn that was made famous in Wayne's World. I think that piece was the first artwork that I was exposed to. And it sort of was a working class sculpture. It was
It's
in a
scrappy,
strip mall.
yeah.
It's what?
I said it's scrappy.
Oh. Well, I thought it was amazing. And
No, I
it's-
mean, scrappy is good.
it is
as in
scrappy.
good, yeah.
It's made out of scrap cars.
Yeah.
Right.
But that way of stacking, I think, has really penetrated my way of being.
Okay, Julia?
So
what do you think?
I'm looking at this painting that is lingering here, and thinking about the model of the city, that the books are arranged as still life. I mean, that's maybe the genre that one would think of. It's firmly in that territory, but we now understand that models can be made of many, other materials can make models for cities.
Right.
And the other element to me that was so lovely about this particular painting was that it's also a palette. It's laid out as stacks of color, and from a position, at least for me, that's the position I have to the palette.
So it looks like choices.
I think
Yeah.
probably for Van Gogh,
Uh-huh.
he probably had the traditional palette that is the iconic image that one would hold in one's hand. But for me, this was the display of color, especially coming after the first room of
Yeah,
of
it's
the
very
of the
maudlin.
country.
All the colors
The-
are very natural,
Right,
neutral.
right.
Yeah.
So this said urban. This suddenly was
This
urban.
is like a city
urban color.
explosion. Yeah, it's why I liked it for this portion of the conversation, and why I wanted to explore it is because when I first saw it, the whole first section is sort
Right.
of like provincial country, modest lives and
Right.
very dreary settings, and then this looks like an explosion. You can literally see
Right. Northern
what is
light
a
to-
sort of a cerebral overload of new information. And I remembered, being 19 and moving to Chicago and what that was like.
Yeah.
And coming from, I'm from Georgia, coming from a small town, and originally I worked in performance, and so all of a sudden I was like sitting in the front row at Steppenwolf, and that to me was like the biggest, like the most exciting. This was like, I'm here. This is real. And I went on to meet, playwrights and directors and actors and artists and dancers and writers, and so it still feels like this a little bit.
Right.
I think, to be here, which is why we all love to live and work here. Okay, so
But
any
just-
other final thoughts?
Sorry, just finishing my story, which connects
Yes,
to this,
yes.
is that, that was my early exposure to art and my understanding of art. But when I was 18, I was a late bloomer. So when I was 18, I ended up going to school here the School of the
At
Art
the School
Institute
of
of
the Art
Chicago.
Institute,
And
yeah.
I came to this museum for the first time in my life living in Chicago. And I remember seeing the portrait of Van Gogh that is the main picture for this show. And like these things just really opened me up and changed my life. And then I was sort of stuck in that academy for a while until, I learned to make work that, speaks to these times that we're living. And that was much later.
Right.
And that was a long trajectory for you
It
to
was
kind
long.
of figure out how to?
Yeah, I mean, I was alone with these old paintings for a long time. And it was a long time of me being alone and not super social, like just having time in the studio.
Right.
And then there
I'm
came
seeing
a
a
point.
theme here.
There came a point when the work became more about my interaction with people and the culture here.
Well, I'm actually going to go right into that because I really do think that the last section that I want to cover is internal as impetus. It's very dramatic. I decided to call it that. So after several turbulent years of upheaval, Van Gogh decides to retreat to the south of France in the city of Arles to build an artist retreat. He resides in this little yellow house that he reflects on as a home of his own. He feels sort of a sense of belonging that he himself, rather than finding, is sort of self-actualizing, is cultivating. And it's here that he paints the original bedroom. We interpret this and many of his works as representations of his emotional interior. And it was also here that he solidified this signature style of lots of heavily impastaed paint, vivid color, and all these ways that when we kind of see a work like this, we know it is Van Gogh. Like, I don't have to know anything about Van Gogh to see a painting like this and know that it is Van Gogh. And that style really was solidified during his time at the Little Yellow House in Arles. So, Alberto, I want to ask you, you use your most intimate spaces and relationships, your home, your family, as collaborators in your work. Is there something about these most personal spaces and relationships that is an inspiration to you? Does that somehow activate something in you? And I love that this segue because you said that it took you a long time to figure out what your making was after looking at old paintings or older works. So is there some kind of connection between those closest relationships and spaces and that realization of your own practice?
Yeah, and this is also one of the first paintings that I saw when I came to the collection here. Yes, those are real moments for me. The moments that I have at home. There's a picture here of us. This one at the Picasso Museum in Barcelona. I like taking my family with me when I go to the museum. I know that it's probably better if I wake up early and I go by myself and I have a peaceful time. But for some reason, I like sharing that time with them. So I bring them all, and I give them coffee and or Coke, to get them excited at the beginning. But then after we see the show, the work, there's a breakdown moment. There's this moment of breakdown, and I think that's the moment that I capture. And we're at the rest area in the Picasso Museum, and that's the area that I think that's the moment that there's something universal in that we could all relate to, those breakdown moments. And I felt like it was enough that I could share with an audience, and they would say, "Oh, I understand this image." In the
I know
same
exactly
way that
what this is. I've experienced it. Yeah.
In the same way that there was something about that Van Gogh bedroom that when I came here and I was 18, like it really resonated with me. I connected to it, and it was for me. It was more formal. It was that I think I even bought a watch at the gift shop. With this painting, and I just liked how I could enter that space, but it was very, very visceral, but at the same time very colorful and expressive. And I always would look at the watch, and it was an experience that I wanted to continue to have.
Well, let me open that up. So, do you remember that moment? Was there a sort of section of life or a moment in life in your practice and in your art making where you kind of felt like you had a lot of good stuff around you, a lot of good stuff in your personal space that was inspiring the things that you were making?
I would go to the word collaboration, and that the house is the collaborator for me. So the things to study are the collaborator. They're the there's a partnership, I would say. Yeah. But to go back, if you're asking an early moment, it wasn't the house, it was landscape, and it was by recollection from Oregon. So I realized that I had looked so closely there, but I was no longer there, that I could actually recall those images for paintings that I was doing before I moved to Chicago.
Oh, wow. So
Yeah.
just a previous home as inspiration, or just
That-
recalling
Actually,
us?
it wasn't home. It was landscape.
Oh,
It was,
okay.
they,
Just
were,
the
they, were,
landscape.
they were images of recollection from the West Coast.
Oh, cool.
But in part because I wasn't there, there was distillation. So I think there's something that I carried over from that earlier work, that that there was an image that I had fixed in my mind, and that had taught me to paint, taught me to see, and the house then was a kind of constantly changing landscape, if you will.
Oh, wow.
You know, once the house has gradually offered itself in the way that a landscape might. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's great. I had not even, so we've never, in all the conversations that we've had about your
hadn't
work,
talked
this
about the
just was a moment. This just happened.
We hadn't
Yeah.
talked about the earlier work in that way.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well, that's beautiful. Okay,
Well, thank
Aymar,
you.
do you have any reflections?
You know, it's interesting that you talk about being in relationship with your house. Really, Open TV started when I was in my home 3 winters ago, and I believe that was a bad winter, as they all are, I guess. And I had been doing yoga to get my body flexible, right? Because in the winter we're all like this all the time. And I could never remember the poses or the sequences. So I would do like 2, and I would be sort of lost. So I'd just turn on music and just start dancing. And it was that kind of combination of moving my body in 2 different ways, yoga and then kind of Beyonce. That really,
Or Beyonce,
or Beyonce, or B, you know,
which is
Queen
the
Bee,
merge
or-
of yoga and Beyonce.
that was the source of the idea for Voga, which is the first pilot that I released for Open TV. Nupita Obama creates Voga.
Okay.
And so that idea kind of spiraled off, and I was like, well, how do I make this thing now? I have this idea called Voga, but I can't do yoga and I can't Vogue. So I thought of my artist friends who I'd met in the city who knew how to do those things, and I wrote a script for them. And seeing that come together in December of 2014 when I got them on set, and I said, do this thing that I just created, and really without a beat, they sort of enacted what was in my head.
Oh, wow.
If you watch the trailer for the piece, which is very simple, it's just Eric Wallace, who's a hip-hop artist and Vogue dancer, sitting on the ground trying to focus herself and enact this thing with just her hands. I just re-released it the other day because actually yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of releasing that trailer.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And people saw it and they immediately also connected to it, right? This idea of being alone with oneself and trying to get in one's body, to focus, to be in the present. This is really beautiful to see how a personal moment can refract and spread around and actually catch on to other people, right? And you connect with these people in ways that you didn't even know you could.
And that's part of the reason why I wanted to call this conversation Through the Looking Glass, because initially in visiting this idea of like having a conversation, a panel about Van Gogh, I think as a person who is just naturally gravitates more towards contemporary works, I struggled with it. I thought, how do I make this present? But the more time that I spent with the work and studying the work, it felt like I'm looking at the life of a man when I look at these paintings. I'm looking at your life, and now that I understand this information about what you're going through, this is a story to me that I can understand, that I can relate to. And just in conversation not too long ago when we were back there, I was kind of talking to our panelists about that this idea that you can go to any gallery in this museum and find something that you can relate to. You can do that because, like Alberto said, he captured the breakdown, and we look at the breakdown and we know what that is. We don't have to be in it. We don't have to live in that moment to go, I totally know what that moment is about. I totally relate to that moment. And in a lot of ways, I think the art history, the information, because that was what this tension was for me in the conversation. You know, does it help? Does it hurt? Is it a problem that we have all this personal information about this artist? It really helped me to have a deeper appreciation for the work. And some of Van Gogh's late career works are deeply moving to me because I understand this is a person who's trying to find calm. He's trying to create peace for himself through his work. And then I just love that you all in your own distinctive ways reflect something very intimate that I think that we can all learn something from and feel like we can recognize ourselves in. Any other comments, questions, concerns?
I just think that I work with a lot of artists and I have a lot of meetings with artists about what kind of thing could you do for a thing called TV, you know? What story would you have to tell? And I think almost always artists have something personal that they're coming from. Some are very explicit about it, and they say, I experienced this and I want other people to relate to this experience. And sometimes it's, you know, masked a little bit because they want to keep it private. But I think that's where the best stories come from. They come from a real place, and they can take on different forms, right? They can be shielded, or you can be very open about it and say, this happened to me. Has it happened to you? But I've seen it go from an artist tells me that idea, and I put that video online, and then someone comments, this has happened to me. This helped me work through it, right? Or seeing this makes me feel less alone. I think that's the power of art, right?
I definitely think that when I reflect on this current exhibition of the bedrooms, the exhibition is called The Bedrooms, but there's like 36 works in the exhibition. That's kind of the feeling that I get, is that something about looking makes me feel less alone, makes me feel like, wow, you were ruminating on some of the same issues of isolation and belonging and purpose in the 1800s, and that's a relevant question all the time for all of us every day, all the time. So what I'd like to do at this point is kind of open up the dialogue to anyone in the audience who has a question or a comment that they want to share with our panelists or with the group.
And
There's a microphone to the rear if you're interested.
There's Gloria Groom.
Anyone?
There's Gloria Groom, curator of this
Do you have a
beautiful
question?
exhibition.
Can you share with us on the microphone if you have a question? Yeah, right in the rear there. We're all friends.
Actually, maybe Becky.
Could you, as artists, talk a little bit about how, as you change personally, through the external perhaps, as you discussed, how does it change your work when you revisit it? How do you see it differently? You talked about revisiting your work.
So how do you see it differently? So Julia,
Was
like you
everybody
said,
able to hear the question about revisiting?
well, and correct me if I'm wrong, you said how do they revisit? Yeah, we discussed revisiting. Internally you change, yes. Oh, wow, so internally. All right, so this idea, okay, so we revisit this idea. We kind of talked about it initially as sort of something static and outside of ourselves, but what you talked about was sort of a process in reference to this tile work is just, you made one, and then the longer you
It
sort of
seemed to
meditated on it, you came
generate
back.
the possibility
So
of...
was there an internal process? Was there anything happening inside you as you approached to make more, to revisit? We'll go back to that.
How to... I think I might answer your question that the internal is also a process of thinking. So I would say that the impulse to do a second and then a third and a fourth was not out of an internal need or an internal, I wouldn't say that it was emotional. It was that the site offered a way to think about the totality of that site, but in parts. And I can speculate in hindsight. I mean, this is from 97, 98. It's an earlier work. That the subject of fragmentation was, I would say that was, one could think about that emotionally or from an internal position. But it was the site offered the map to think about itself. If you, yeah.
Any other
Well,
comments?
I mean, I want to speak of the bedrooms themselves.
Of Van Gogh's?
Of Van Gogh's,
yeah.
He made, this is answering your question, or speaking to your question, but he made the first one. He thought that it was ruined, so he made that second version. And like in that, it's not just that I'm looking at the paintings, at the image that's exciting to me. It's actually that I could see certain changes that he made which reflect, like his transformation. He changed from making the first one to making the second one. Even if they're minute changes, we're always changing. And that, for me, is what's amazing to be able to see all three paintings is we're not just seeing three slightly different works. We're seeing somebody who is at different states of mind or, has grown or is more troubled or has revelations in the second one, like makes decisions that, for me, in the second one work better. And I don't know if it's just me gravitating to the second one, this one, because that's the one I've known since I came here.
Actually, this is the one from
This
Amsterdam.
is the first one. This is the first one.
This is the first one.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
The Institutes is the second one.
So for
right?
me,
This is
the
the
Art
first
Institute, the one that the Art Institute owns,
Yeah,
is my
that's the
favorite.
second one.
It's
That's
my
the
favorite
second
one.
Yeah.
But it's that revisited one, and I'm not sure if it's just because of nostalgia that I'm drawn to that one, or because I feel that his thoughts evolved and they became clearer through paint in that second one. And that, yeah, we are always changing. So every time we revisit a work, those changes are reflected, even if minutely in the work.
Yeah. I think one of the things I love about television is that it changes, and that season to season, creators are going back and revisiting the first season and making improvements, making changes, right? Sometimes those are very explicit. Sometimes it takes a while to see that those changes are happening.
Yeah.
And I think what's exciting about television now is that there's so many more shows and budgets have gone down that they're actually more personal TV series. I think of shows like FX's Louie or HBO's Girls that are really the visions of almost a singular mind, obviously in conversation with writers and directors and all these things. But they're very different than Friends, right, which is big writing staff, big cast. And you see changes from season 1 to season 11 or 12 or however when it ended. But when you see changes in Louie or Girls, and with some of our programs like You're So Talented, which is from Sam Bailey, you're seeing someone grow on screen, right? And you're seeing them look at what they've done and try and make it better. And I want people to take pleasure in that process of growing with an artist. And I think art people do. They understand that, right? That when you're following an artist's work, you're not just looking at new pieces, right? It's not that it's new. It's that the artist made this in a different point in their life, and something about the work has changed. Something about the depth or the complexity or the form or something has changed.
And that's how I think that's how we all have those artists that we love.
Right.
I mean, I think part of that love is about having that understanding of progression, of trajectory, growing with that person.
Yeah.
That kinship is, I think, the same whether it's like a family member or a musician or a painter or a photographer or writer. That first novel and then you read that fifth novel. I'm a huge Toni Morrison fan. I have every book she's ever written, and I've read them all twice. But one of the things that I do is I reread them every few years because I've changed.
So
And
you're
I
not,
wonder,
you're not reading the same book.
right, I
Because
wonder
you're seeing
if
it.
what I'm reading
Yeah,
is
yeah,
totally
yeah.
different, because she writes a lot about the experiences of women I can relate to.
Right.
What does that mean to me at 20? It means something very different at 35, you know, and it'll mean something different at 50. So I think part of that love is you're also informing, like the things you make are also informing the public, and they're informing you, you're informing them through your practice, and so it's this beautiful cyclical exchange that I've tried to recreate in the middle of Griffin Court at the Art Institute of Chicago.
Right.
So are there any other questions, comments that our audience wants to share? Be brave.
Yes, there's one over there.
Okay, yes, Becky will bring the mic to you.
Yeah, I'd like to relate it back to the conversation with the nest. Okay, if you look at the nest in relationship to his progression, we have simplistic to complicated to chaos.
Yeah.
And if you start to look at the nest as a separate entity with individual parts, and then a complex, interwoven, connected space in which you then become protected within the inside of the nest. Relate that then back to how he progressed from simplicity to individual experimentation, then on to complex layering of what is his work now.
So maybe all his works, he was sort of meditating on that idea of a nest, that impasto style of layering paint, but trying to capture that dimension of something in real life, something organic. I can definitely see that. Any other questions? Any other comments?
I might say about the nests, of course, we're looking at nests that are not his,
Right.
on loan from the Field Museum, but this is almost a kind of materials pun, but the scale of the straw and do we have one? The scale of the straw and the bits that the straw is holding
Yeah.
is the scale of the mark of the pen reed, the reed pen that is made of organic material that he drew with, and the scale of the larger exterior parts of the nest. One could almost lift one of those moments out and dip it in the ink and make the line that would be the representation of the grass in the poet's garden, or the branch in the tree of the poet's garden, or the weeping tree. So suddenly I was understanding organic material as not only the subject of the work, but kind of as an indication of scale of the work itself, especially I think with the drawings. I was really excited and was excited by that.
Any other questions? Yes, please. Becky will find you with the microphone.
Hi. This might be a really broad question, so I'm sorry.
Let's bring it closer to you.
So when we talk about Vincent van Gogh, we talk about how his personal life affected his work. And I've just started reading his letters. And in the introduction, it talks about how Joanna van Gogh, who's Theo's wife, was concerned about publishing them because she thought the personal issues would conflict with other people's views of him. And I am wondering if you guys think that all artwork should be about the personal or yourself as a person, and if your artwork is, or if the viewer should sort of remove themselves from seeing an artist as a person or their personal
So
issues.
only seeing the object and not necessarily considering the person who made it or their personal trajectory? Like,
Yes.
okay. So the question is, do we feel that we should consider that or not in the way that we look at work?
The biography
I mean,
of the
maybe in
artist?
this, maybe in this context, with the letters, being that his sister-in-law published, or should we have that, or should we not have that? I think she's asking, do we think that's true about art in general, or just in this context as well?
Should we see the work together with the letters? Well, we could, so we should.
You mean it's
That's
available?
the way to look at it.
Yeah.
It's
I
available.
mean, whatever strengthens our relationship with the work. Like, I was thinking about that, the diagram that they drew on the floor plan of the
Yeah,
house,
yeah.
and it's nice. It was good that it was there. It really gave me a sense of place, but it really doesn't do as much as looking at the painting itself. But maybe for some people, that floor plan is more important. So, I mean, I think whatever draws us nearer to the work, I think all of us have different entry points. Like, mine is much more visual, and, like, all I need to see is the painting, and it's, like, sometimes I go to the museums, I don't even read labels because I like having the experience. But some people need the labels because they need an entry point. So I think if it's available, why not?
Yeah, I'm partial.
Yeah.
I work in museum education, so
You
so
want
yes,
the-
I feel
you
like
want the
that's really
information.
important. It's in the context of this exhibition, it totally helped me. I will say it totally helped me to have a deeper understanding, but then also appreciation, actually. And I can't speak for other people. I don't think that's true in every case. You have to have it. But I know for me, and learning about this exhibition before it came, and sort of preparing for our conversation today, having that extra information
Yeah.
was like deeply moving.
Yeah.
I think also just because his life is a challenging story, but then also you can see he writes with such passion and a lot of eloquence about
Yes.
his work, about his community, the community of art, of artists, and just sort of the pedagogy behind like what is good, what is bad. He's a passionate individual. So that to me, you can see it in the work. I feel like I can see he thought of painting as authorship. He wanted it to do what words do.
Right.
And I definitely felt like I could see the story.
Right.
So the letters totally helped me to appreciate it.
And going back to the question of repetition or rethinking, I mean, that's in the letters when he writes about what he's doing and then he makes the picture for Teo of the painting that he's doing or the painting that he wants to do. Those are so intertwined in the letters that, I mean, the letters are, going back to your question about is it appropriate that we have access to those, it's a luxury to have that kind of insight, and it's a one-to-one communication. So I'm thinking about the experience I had at a lecture of Alberto's recently, where there was an image and there was a response to the image, and there was an opportunity for someone to engage you in real time through Instagram or
That was the Instagram.
It was the Instagram. So there's, I can't help think about the electronic dispersal of communications in relation to that question. The response was directed to you personally, just as Vincent was writing
Yeah.
to Teo, but everybody could see it.
Yeah.
So
It was for the Instagram takeover here at
Yes.
the museum I was showing.
Yes, that's part of
Right.
his residency here.
Right,
He's
right.
an artist in residence in museum
Yeah.
education here.
So
Go
it was
ahead, yeah.
personal and public at the very
Yeah.
same time.
So I was
Yeah,
showing
yeah,
the images
yeah.
that I posted on Instagram, but in this slide lecture I also showed the response
Yes,
of the
it was really
audience,
exciting.
of the
Oh,
museum
wow.
followers.
It was really exciting to see them at the same time. Yeah, yeah.
So the work and their response to what you put out there, right?
So that
next
now
to each other.
becomes the work.
Yeah.
Like the work is not just the Instagram post, it's also
What people
the-
had to say.
the conversation that comes along with it.
Yeah.
I love how you made work out of that.
Yeah.
It was
Like
fun.
you
I know.
made use of it. It has another
Yeah.
life.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think people want a relationship with the artist. And I definitely think people should have the right to just view the work and know nothing. But I think that denies the fact that art is made by people, and that is the thing that makes us human, and our stories, our lives, our experiences are informed by those works. I'm biased here because in my first project on web series, that's what I did. I interviewed people who made web series about why they made them. And I was, I didn't want to keep the mystery at all. I wanted to know, and I think that deepened my appreciation of what they did. And I think it helped that a lot of those people were on Twitter, on Instagram, posting it and talking directly to their fans. And those are the people who were successful because they could say, this episode was meaningful to me because of X, and then they could have a conversation about it with somebody. I mean, this is what Issa Rae did, this is what Felicia Day did, and they went on to great success, and because people felt like they knew them, and they felt like they were on the journey with them.
Is that always a good thing? Because that kind of takes me into this place of like the comments.
Right, but you have to want it.
What about the comments?
right.
You have to want it, but also like comment sections are very different online. There are plenty of comment sections that are actually wonderful communities that are mutually supportive. I think they tend to be bad on like mainstream sites when it's just like lots of different kind of people at once, but the best ones are actually smaller kind of conversations. They're not as open as you would think. They're really people who have mutual interests and mutual respect for what they're consuming, mutual respect for the writers, the artists that they're interacting with. I mean, did you find that experience a generally respectful one?
No. But that was
a big institution.
Hence my comment was like, is that always great? Yeah.
But that was also the fun part of it for me, was that I was really being disrespected by people that held the museum collection up really high,
Right.
and all of a sudden I'm here posting personal things. I mean, they were still artworks, but they were personal, and people felt that I was compromising that sacred space of the museum. And I was, and I was playing with that, but so there were some people that were really angry.
And that exchange totally inspired the topic for this discussion, actually.
Really?
Yes, watching Alberto go through that process. I had been ruminating on this for a while, and I knew I wanted something about this tension between internal life and public output, but I couldn't put my finger on it. But it was actually your Instagram takeover and watching you go through the process of trying to figure out how to respond, how to continue, and then even, to make work out of it, to make some kind of creative response out of it. That, to me, was sort of the basis for this conversation. Do we have any other questions, any other comments? Okay, Becky will find you. Thank you, Becky.
I decided to be brave. What about the role of the critic? Some artists consider the art critic pompous, a parasite, that they make their living by feeding off of you. You happen to be artists who are pretty vocal and willing to share, wanting to interact. You respect the reaction of the public to your work. But some artists are really so private, and yet we still would like to understand them better. So the critic steps in and tells us what the artist intended, tells us what the imagery represents and where the inspiration comes from. Do you feel that that's a service to the public?
Uh-oh.
In most cases. In most cases.
I'll take this first because it's less personal for me, because I have, in my life, been a critic of film, of TV, and of web series, and I have also made that. And I can say that when I was writing about web series, I would get people emailing me and like demanding that I write about them, right? Because it was, I mean, if you're talking about something that's in the Art Institute or something that's on television or something that's in theaters, there's tons of critics always weighing in. But for newer art forms, for marginal art forms, people actually want that feedback. They want someone to recognize their work and tell other people to see it, right? And that's still a challenge to this day. I think I make beautiful works here in Chicago, but there's not that many people writing about web series because there's like 400 TV shows on with bigger budgets. So I really appreciate criticism, and I think criticism is valuable to helping an art form develop. But I can understand maybe artists don't agree with that.
I see it as very useful, and if one is fortunate to have someone else write about the work, that's exciting to me. If there's disagreement in what's been written, it's there for me to think about. So I find it very useful and actually usually generous and generative. No.
It seems like the criticism in Chicago is really friendly.
Friendly?
Yeah, I find that people here are more slow to give negative criticism, and I think maybe that's why I thought the Instagram takeover was so much fun, because all of a sudden people who weren't professional critics were sharing their thoughts, and some of them were really, really harsh. Some of them were outrageous, but there was something exciting about being able to respond to that. And, you know, more so, I think, on the stage of, on a public stage, sort of on social media. But I don't think I would like it as much if I was negatively criticized by a professional critic. That'd probably be harsh. It'd probably be harder on me, but I've never really experienced that. Not because I'm a good artist, just because I think they're friendly here in Chicago.
I do think that critics here are Midwestern nice. Just coming, prior to this, I worked in performance, and so you would read, you know, you'd read whatever came out in the New York Times. You would read what was happening on other coasts and how people were receiving work, and you notice this real difference between, and then you do transfers. That I think people don't know how much stuff comes from Chicago and goes out to both coasts. And so you would know who directed it or wrote it or was in it, and have very different reviews. But I think it's always difficult to be critiqued, just because you get this very unfiltered opinion that's outside of you of what you're doing. But I think it's productive.
Well, there's this thing in the art community in Chicago that happens on the Facebook art community, where artists will actually post a review that they had of somewhere, and they'll thank the critic. Like, they'll tag them too.
I actually had a friend do that the other day. Yeah, an artist here, a sculptor here in town, he reposted on his Facebook page a write-up that had been written about his work, unprompted, that they had written about an exhibition here in town.
So they have relationships with the critic. They'll say, thank you to this person for writing such a great review of my work.
And that is really nice. You're right. When you think about it that way, that is extremely nice.
But I maybe this is obvious, but we think of the word criticism as being negative, and actually, for me, it's a way of thinking critically about one's own work. So this goes back to the first question about revisiting, which is not that the work is, maybe it didn't completely satisfy myself. So how to think critically about my own work is that, I mean, that has to be part of the process. But it doesn't, it's not necessarily negative, because one can see the work from a different position.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I definitely, what I do is totally collaborative. It requires so many different opinions, so many different inputs, and I welcome it, because sometimes I'm too close to a detail, or maybe too far away and looking at everything, that's having that other person say, this is the thing you don't see. And sometimes that's like the thing you need to go and fix or address, or sometimes it's like the thing that's merited in this that you don't see. And I think we need that. We need that really honest family member or critic.
Yeah, or a complete stranger. I mean, I'm in academia, a lot of our criticism is blind, you know, like I'll submit to a journal, I submit my book to a press, and I get feedback sometimes from someone I don't know. And there's a lot of griping about that in academia, but ultimately I think that's a good thing. We're always getting critiqued, and that's how you get better. You know?
Any other questions? Any other comments? Thank you so much for joining us tonight, everybody.
Thank
This was
you.
a lot of fun. This was fun.